Uh, Alrighty, so hello. We are quite late today, as you can probably see. Uh, Let me just move this here. Let me just quickly download stuff. Although this module is a bit of a smaller one, so hope we can just cover it
In the last
before time, and then I can upload this video. Anyways, by the way, tomorrow will be my last day at home here, and I'll be moving where I was actually living with some friends on Monday. So let me quickly set this up. Cut. Which section is this? Okay, I pasted. And done. Okay, let me quickly open this as well. CMP intro. Yeah.
last module, we had a in the last module, we had a look under the hood of Vue. Maybe you skipped this module, that's fine as well. But if you skipped it, be aware that in that module, I also talked about using multiple Vue apps, and I highlighted that those apps would then not be connected, so that every Vue app you have, which controls its part of the HTML page, is totally independent from other apps. Now we're going to take this concept of multiple apps one step further, and we're going to explore Vue components, another core feature built into Vue, which indeed builds up on all the other pieces you learned about thus far. So this is an important next step, because as you will see, components will now be there throughout the entire rest of the course, and components are a super important concept in Vue, but also in other alternative frameworks like Angular or React, just in case you ever want to explore those as well.
Yep. So that's a thing. Components are really important. Shit. Let me just update this file real quick. Script tag. And where is my code? By the way, are we recording? Yes, we are. Let me paste it here. And oh fuck. Why do I end up doing that anyways?
As well. In this module, we will therefore see what exactly components are and why we have this concept and how we use it, of course. And we'll start working with some components so that we get a first idea of what a component is and what we can do with it. Now again, attached to find a starting project, which gives you this page essentially. It's a little dummy application where you can keep a list of your friends around and store the phone number and email address of your friends. It's just a dummy application, but it will allow us to explore the concept of components. Now, if we inspect the code for this, we got an index.html file with some markup, to be precise with an unordered list that holds the two friend list items, so one list item per friend, and then we have a nested list in every friend with the phone and email number. We got the name, we got a button which currently does nothing, and important, we also got an empty app.js file, so no Vue app at all. And now it would not be totally unrealistic that this should be managed as one app, and we maybe don't want to hard code this friend data into the HTML code, but instead we want to keep that friend data around in our Vue code, in our Vue application. And we don't want to hard code those list items into the HTML code, but we want to render those list items dynamically with Vue.js. And it turns out that with the knowledge we gained thus far, that is possible, but actually has some tricky elements to it. But let's try implementing this with what we learned thus far. So in the app.js file, I'm going to create a new Vue app with Vue create app. And of course, we're going to mount this to control a part of the DOM with it. And here I want to control this section, which has an ID of app. So let's target this with this ID selector here. And now let's say we want to implement this by adding some data here. And actually in here, we have our friends property, which should be an array full of data about our friends. And each friend could be represented by an object where we, for example, have an ID, manual, for example. Then a name field, Manuel Lawrence for my friend Manuel here. A phone field with that imaginary phone number. You can try calling it. Maybe you get someone there, but I just made that number up. And the email address, which of course also is fictionary. So let's store that as well. And with that, we would have an
Let me just catch up real quick. Manuel Lawrence phone 01234678991. Do we have to do that? I think we do. Let me just
entry for Manuel. Now let's add a second one for Julie. So here we have Julie Jones. We can grab her imaginary phone number and store that here. And also
okay, so he was copying that from there. Let me also do the same. Julie phone number and email.
so grab her imaginary email address and store that here. And now we have that data managed in JavaScript. And as before in the course, that is a scenario you will typically have. That could be data which you fetched from a database. It could be data which the user entered. You will rarely have websites where you hard code data like this into the HTML code. That's why this approach, which we had here initially, is not very realistic and why we instead might want to use Vue. Also, to, for example, make this button work and ensure that we only show our details here with the phone number and the email if the button is pressed. So therefore, now we have that data. With that data, we can delete one of the two list items and then use v-for here, as we learned it, to go through all the friends in this friends data property. So in this data property which holds this array. So we're looping through these two array elements now. And therefore now inside of this list item, inside of v-for, we can now interpolate friend.name, for example. Here, for the phone number, we can output, with double curly braces, friend.phone. And instead of the email address, we can output friend.email. And we can also assign a key here and bind it dynamically to friend.id because we have that ID field on every friend entry. And with that...
Let me again catch up real quick. Add a key here. Friend.id. Button remains the same. Phone number. I think we can copy this. This as well. Phone. Email.
And if we save all that and reload, we get the same as before, but now with less HTML code leveraging Vue. But the show details button is not working, and that's the part where it gets tricky. Of course, we could add methods here, and then add a method which we could call toggle details, which should be connected to the button, and we want to show the details if they're not currently visible and hide them if they were visible. So we could add a second data property, details are visible, which initially, let's say, is false, to initially not show them.
Oh shit.
And then here in toggle details, we set details are visible to what they're currently not, to basically invert the value, as we also did it many times before. And with that, we can go back to the HTML code and connect that button. Upon a click, I want to trigger toggle details. So I want to execute this newly added method here. And then we get that details are...
Okay, my bad. I always get this wrong.
are visible property, which we can use with the if on this unordered list to control whether that list should be shown, so whether it should be added to the DOM or not. We can then even replace this label on the button dynamically by checking if details are visible, and if they are, the button should say hide details and only otherwise say show details. And of course, we could also use a computed property here, but I want to keep this simple and to the point, so I will not do it here. If we now reload, we get the button. But the problem is, no matter on which friend we press the button, we always show the details, or hide the details, of all friends.
All right.
And it should be obvious why that happens. With v4, we output multiple list items here, one for every friend. But the button always points at the same method. So every button for every friend gets the same event handler. It points at the same method. So no matter which button on which friend we press, we always call the same method, and we just have details are visible here, which is just one property that controls the visibility of the details in both contexts. Now, there would be workarounds. We could pass the ID here to toggle details. We could forward the friend ID to toggle details. And then inside of toggle details, we could expect that ID and now manage two properties. Details are visible A, details are visible B, and we could try to make it work with properties like that. But still, it would be very cumbersome. I'm not sure how we would make it work with VIF to find out on which friend we are here. So ultimately, this is not what we want to do. I also don't even want to get started with having A, B, C, and whatever here, because this list may grow dynamically. It doesn't in this application because it's a simple one, but if you allow users to add new friends, you can't anticipate how many properties you'll need to toggle the visibility of the details. So this will lead nowhere, and therefore I'll revert this here. This is not how I want to solve that. Instead, that's exactly the kind of problem we can solve with components. So let's see what components are, how we create them, and how we work with them. Components are great if you have certain pieces of HTML, certain HTML blocks, like here, which you reuse in different parts of your page, like here, where we create multiple list items, where you then have a certain functionality that should be enclosed in that HTML block, and that should be specific to this HTML block. Components can also be great to splitting your big application into multiple smaller chunks, but that's something we'll explore later, automatically, once we work more and more with components. So, since components seem to be very helpful, how can we create such a component? How does it work? A component is an official feature Vue.js knows. And we can create one on an app. So on an app we created with createApp by using that app, which in my case here is stored in that app constant, and calling the component method on it. This tells Vue that we want to create a new component. Now this component method needs two things. The first thing is an identifier, because a component, and that's important, you have to memorize this, a component is basically like a custom HTML element. So here you define your own HTML tag. And that could, for example, be user-contact or friend-contact, something like this. You should always use an identifier that contains a dash. So you should always have component names, custom HTML tags, therefore, which contain a dash, so which are made up of two words. The reason for that is simple. This avoids that you potentially clash with official built-in HTML elements. For example, if I would name my component h2, well, there already is a h2 element, and that would therefore clash. Therefore, a simple rule is that you should use multi-word component names, so custom HTML tags, because all built-in HTML elements are single-word elements. So that's now my own HTML element name, which we will later be able to use. This is the identifier of our component, so to say. The second argument you pass to this component method is a config object, just as you pass it to createApp. Because, and that's another important piece of information to keep in mind, a Vue component is essentially just another Vue app, just an app that belongs to another app. So this component, which we're creating here, is a new Vue app, but, and that's the important thing, an app which will be connected to our main app. So components are like mini apps, you could say. So therefore, they can also have data, they can have methods, and therefore here, our component can have its own data, where we, for example, have a details are visible property, which initially is false. We can also add methods to our component and add our toggle details method here to the methods of my own component, so that we then toggle this component-specific data with this component-specific method. And we can remove methods from the main app now, and also get rid of details are visible there. We could also keep it here. We wouldn't have a clash, because this component is essentially encapsulated. It does not communicate with the parent app, so with the app it belongs to. But we can still remove this property, because we don't need it in the main app anymore. So now we got our component, friend contact. And how do we now use this component, and how does it work? Well, this component misses one important thing. Before we can use it. And that's a template. Since this is a new app, it needs its own template. Our main app has a template, this whole section, which we mounted the app to, but our component now is a mini app and needs its own template. Now here we don't mount this component. We don't call mount on it. So that's not how we will connect it to HTML. Instead here, for the moment, we'll add this template option, which I also showed in the deep dive, in the behind the scenes module. In case you skipped that, yes, there is a template option which you can add to your Vue apps, also to the main app, to define the template of that app. So to define the HTML code of that app. And you need to do that for this component. Now I will already say that later in the course, in the next modules, we will learn about a much nicer way of defining those templates. But for the moment, I'll just create a multi-line string here with backticks. So these are not single quotes, these are backticks, which is a different character on the keyboard. And I will now grab this list item here, so this entire code, and cut it from my HTML file, and instead add it here in this backticked string. And I'm using backticks because they allow me to write a multi-line string like this. But in the end, that's just a JavaScript string now, with all those Vue features in it, though. Now, I will remove that v4 code on the list item, and to make sure the interpolations work, for the moment, I will add a friend property to the data of that component. So not friends, but friend. And I will just copy one friend, which I defined here. Let's take Manuel and store him in this friend key. This is just temporary. We'll soon make it work with our list again. But to get started, we'll just use friend like that. And now if I save that, we can finally start using our own component and therefore our own HTML element. Because now we can go to index.html, and inside of our main app's template, we can now use friend contact as if it would be an official HTML element. And it's not. I really want to emphasize it. This is not an HTML element which the browser would know. If you try to use that outside of the Vue app control part, this will do nothing. The browser will ignore it. But inside of our main app, Vue will understand this. It will understand this component because we registered this component to our main app with the component method by giving it that exact identifier, which I'm now using as a HTML tag in my template. And that's why we should use a non-default HTML tag name here, because if we would have named our component h2, Vue would not recognize it as a custom component, of course. But since we have such a name with a dash in it, a two-word name, which is this identifier we used here, Vue detects that here, in the end, we want to render this mini app with its template and all the dynamic pieces in the template. So now if we save this again and reload, we see Manuel Lawrence on the screen. And we can click show details and hide details, and this just works. And now we can repeat that and simply add another component. And if I reload, we have Manuel Lawrence twice. And the important thing is, every Manuel Lawrence works standalone, totally detached from the other one. Now, of course, we have the same data twice now. That's something we're going to fix soon. But this shows you how components allow you to easily replicate an encapsulated piece of HTML code with, and that's the important part, with attached data and logic. So components are reusable pieces of HTML with connected data and logic. And that is very, very powerful, especially as you will soon see how we can also reuse one and the same component with different data that we pass into the component. That will be the next step, which will then really make components a powerful tool. But you can hopefully already see how a component helps us encapsulate structure, content, and logic into small, reusable pieces. And you can really add as many of these components here as you want, and they will all be rendered and they all work standalone. So now we got a bunch of Vue mini apps in the same main app. And these apps will then also be able to communicate with each other, to share information, and hence will have the best of both worlds. Encapsulated, isolated pieces of code, which also makes it easier to work on that code in case you have bigger projects. And at the same time, we can combine all those isolated pieces to build a bigger app from them. Now that are components, and they will be super important, and we're going to use them throughout the rest of the course. But at the same time, we're now already reaching a part where this setup we used thus far has certain limitations. We'll have more and more code in the same file, and writing templates like this in such a string form, that will not be very nice to do. In addition, we of course also need to learn more about components so that we can really make this component reusable and also work with different data, so that the component acts like a shell to which we can pass different data. We'll take care of all of that in the next modules.
Yep.
Now in this module, we're just getting started with components, and we don't really see their full potential yet. This will change. Over the next modules, you will learn all about components, and you will learn how you can build applications like this one, where the entire user interface is built by combining components, and where we use components to encapsulate different templates and logic tied to that templates into reusable building blocks. You will see how that makes it easier to structure the code base of complex apps and keep it manageable by splitting your code, your logic, and also your templates and what's on the screen into smaller reusable pieces. Now this is all code you won't understand at this point, but we'll get there, and we'll get there starting in the next module.
All right. Okay. If you control multiple independent parts of HTML pages, you will often work with multiple Vue apps. Yeah. On the other hand, if you're building SPA, you typically work with one root app, only used once, and you instead build up user with multiple components. Why? Because Vue apps are independent from each other and they can't really communicate. And you might find hacks to make it work, but obviously there is not any official way of sharing the data and whatever. So components, on the other hand, do offer certain communications and mechanism. By the way, that Vue code at the last .vue files, that's how it is done. That's how I also done in my project. So they do offer certain communication mechanisms that allow you to exchange data between them. Hence, you can build one connected UI if you work with one root app that holds multiple components. You'll see that in lectures. Okay. So that is really it. And that is going to be it for this lecture as well. So I know it wasn't much today, although I had like Raksha Bandhan, Rakhi today, which was, if you can see, I have like 4 of them, and it was mostly here and there. I went to temple, all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, tomorrow I'll have to pack shit up, like my clothes and everything else, obviously this monitor and also all that kind of stuff. So maybe I might end up doing one of the module tomorrow, or I don't really know. Let us see what happens. And yeah, I think that is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully I'll figure something out, and from day after tomorrow you'll be seeing me at a different place with a different setup, and we'll be back with more good stuff as well. So yeah, if you're watching, thank you for watching. Have a good day or night. I'm going to go get some rest and start packing and all that kind of thing tomorrow. Yeah, anyways, signing off for now. Bye bye.